And welcome to the Crunch McDabbles Show. I'm your host, Crunch McDabbles. This is the only show where we break down your favorite Pathfinder 2nd Edition classes into delicious 3-course ensembles. Today's show, The Secrets of Magus, Part 1. And we are going deep inside the Secrets of Magic new release book to take a deep dive look at the Magus class, starting with this observation about Pathfinder's 2nd Edition. Up until now, Pathfinder 2nd Edition classes have been in one of two camps. You're either a martial or you're a spellcaster, and the dividing line between these two camps was pretty rigid. So even if you wanted to make a wizard that archetyped into a fighter and took all the great fighter feats, every level you took fighter feats, the end result would always be a wizard that could go 7 consecutive game nights without hitting once with their sword. And even while all that was going on, even if they weren't even trying, they could completely fry enemies with a heightened shocking grasp or a heightened burning hands or what have you. Any spell they cast would be awesome. And that was just the way it was. And this was particularly hard for some classes, like a bard that wanted to be good with a rapier, or a cleric that wants to run around hitting things with their deity's favorite weapon. But you were stuck not being very good at melee. And this was because of this rigid divide. If you were a spellcaster, you were good at casting spells. And if you were a martial, you were good with weapons. And there wasn't much overlap. That is, until now. The Magus is the first class that shatters this barrier. Shatters, yeah. The Magus is full caster, and they are full martial, and they are full heavy metal. Starting with the martial side of things, the martial has that coveted full weapon proficiency that everyone wants. They start off as trained with all simple and martial weapons, that's fine. Then at 5th level, they advance to expert proficiency, and then at 13th level, they advance to master proficiency. Now this is just like all the other martial classes. And on top of that, their key class ability is a choice of dexterity or strength. And all this means, these two things together, means that the Magus is never going to be lagging behind the other martial classes, that 1 or 2 or 3 points to hit behind the other ones. Instead, they're going to be right up there with their 2 hit. And the weapon damage keeps up as well. The Magus gets weapon specialization at level 7 and greater weapon specialization at level 15. And this is exactly like all the other martial classes. This means starting at level 7, you are adding 2 extra damage on every hit. And then this increases to 3 extra damage at 13th level when you get master weapon proficiency. And then this increases to 6 extra damage per hit at level 15 when you get greater weapon specialization. All this means is the Magus keeps up with all the basics, both the 2 hit and the damage. And for the damage too, the Magus has its own way to add in some bonus damage in its own unique way by entering the Arcane Cascade stance. The Magus gets this stance right at level 1, and they have to spend a single action in order to enter that stance, and they have to use that single action immediately after casting a spell on your off turn. Now here is the thing, Arcane Cascade, it's not going to be very much damage at all. In fact, it's just 1 extra point of damage at level 1. And then at level 7, this increases to 2 extra damage. And then at level 15, it maxes out at 3 extra damage. Now the thing about this, it's terrible damage. Let's not even joke around or kid around about it. That's awful. At level 15 to get 3 extra damage, who cares? But why do I love the Arcane Cascade stance so much? It's because the Arcane Cascade is really, really great for punishing monsters with weaknesses. The reason for this is that the type of damage that the Arcane Cascade stance adds, that 1 or 2 or 3 damage, it's going to be the type of damage from the spell you cast right before you entered the stance. So even if it's only adding that 1 damage, it's going to add damage of that type. And that 1 point of damage, that would be enough to trigger that monster's weakness every single time you hit that monster, as long as you stay in that stance. Let's take a look at an example. You've got your Magus here, and it's a Magus with a mace. And let's say you're fighting a nasty green troll. Now, the troll has weakness to fire, so sorry for that spoiler. You should know that by now, but anyways. So on your first turn, you are going to cast a fire spell, even if it's just a cantrip like Produce Flame. And then immediately after, even if your Produce Flame didn't hit, you can still enter the Arcane Cascade stance as a single action. And now every attack you make, it's going to have that lingering fire magic attached to it, and it will deal 1 point of fire damage. But that 1 point of fire damage is enough to trigger the troll's weakness every attack from then on, as long as you stay in that stance. So now, after you are in the Arcane Cascade stance, you can switch back to your high damage attacks and spell strikes, and still deal fire damage on each hit. So you switch back to your heightened Shocking Grasp spell strike attack, and even though those deal electricity damage, your Arcane Cascade is still dealing that fire damage too. So now you're killing the troll both with your high damage spell strike and with the fire damage that they have a weakness to. So the Magus becomes this lethal hunter on the battlefield for monsters with weaknesses. This means using recall knowledge is important, and certainly, depending on how your DM handles recall knowledge, it might be worthwhile to hint that you're looking for monster weaknesses, specifically when you check, or even roleplay this up by making your Magus a student of monster weaknesses, or maybe even create a monster weakness lore in your campaign. It would actually be a neat area for your character to research. And the Magus has all sorts of different ways to apply different types of damage when they use their Arcane Cascade. There are cantrips for all the elements, and telekinetic projectile adds slashing, piercing, or bludgeon damage, which is kind of neat when you think about it, because the idea is there's a reminiscent magic circulating through your attacks, and this would mean after a telekinetic projectile attack or spell strike, each time you attack, more projectiles would keep hitting the target. And just a couple of them, but it would be kind of neat, a neat visual. You also have force, mental, or negative damage from casting a spell without a damage type. So there's some other types of damage you could apply. All of this makes the Magus a great martial character and really potent against monsters with weaknesses. But the Magus is also a full caster. Well, okay, there's a record scratch there. Not exactly a full caster, but it's still a really good caster. So we'll put a little asterisk next to the full caster. But let's have a look at it. To begin with, you have less spells, and less spells in two ways. Usually a caster will have 3 spells of each level. They start out with 2 spells a level at odd levels when they get new spells, and then 3 at even levels when they don't get new spells. The Magus, it always only has 2 or just 1 at like low levels. And it gets even worse from there. The Magus is only going to have 2 levels of spells. So for example, when you go from level 4 to level 5, you gain 3rd level spells, the high level, but at the same time you lose all your 1st level spell slots. So you're only going to have 2 levels of spells at any time, at most. Now before you break out all the pitchforks and come after me for this actually isn't that bad. So we can climb down off the ledge, we'll take a deep breath and we'll look at this. What this means is the Magus is always going to have the latest, greatest, high-level spells right at the same level as all the other casters. What they lose is a bunch of low-level spells. So by comparison, let's say at 9th level, the Magus is going to have 2 5th-level spells and 2 4th-level spells, while the Cleric is going to have a bunch of spells. They're going to have 2 5th-level spells, 3 4th-level spells, 3 3rd-level spells, 3 2nd-level spells, and 3 1st-level spells. So that's 10 more spell slots. But is that 1st and 2nd level spell slot really making a big difference? Not for damaging monsters. A cantrip, which is automatically heightened, is going to deal more damage than a 1st level spell slot. So all you're really giving up as a Magus is a bunch of these low level utility type spell slots, while still keeping all those nasty high level damaging spells. To me, that's a great trade-off. I'd take that all day and all night too. So as long as I took it at day, I'd take it at night too. So the Magus is a great damaging caster, but not a great utility caster. If you need a caster that has the spell you need just at the right time, a wizard or a cleric, that's going to be the way to go. But if you need a caster that can fry a bad guy so that bad guy doesn't kill you or kill your party, and so that you can win the adventure, then a Magus is going to be just fine. Now, all that being said, starting at level 7, the Magus does get these other spell slots that are perfect for some utility spells. These are called studious spells. When you get these 2 spell slots, starting at level 7, they're going to be level 2 spell slots. And that's kind of interesting. This matters for heightening these spells. Now, you can only choose certain spells to memorize in these spell slots, and none of them are going to be damage spells. So you kind of have to memorize a few utility spells every day. You're almost forced to, which is kind of good because you would just stack it full of spell strike spells if you could. But you can't, so you can put some utility spells in there. At 7th level, your choices are Spider Climb, Water Breathing, and True Strike. And it's interesting there that True Strike is going to be memorized and put into a 2nd level spell slot, but True Strike can't be heightened, so it's kind of interesting. Just interesting that it works out that way. It doesn't do anything different, functions the same as a True Strike, but there it is as a 2nd level spell. But remember, my love affair with the True Strike spell, this is a great single action spell to unlock a whole bunch of potential in your Magus character. And then at 11th level, you don't get more slots. You still just have 2 slots, but you add in new spells in there. So haste gets added to the list of spells that you can put in there. I still like True Strike on that. Maybe you'd get some mileage out of haste. I don't know. But since they're 3rd level spells now, you can see that the duration of some of the spells is going to change. The Water Breathing, for example, increases to 8 hours if you took that spell slot and cast it. You get 8 hours of Water Breathing because now it's a 3rd level spell. And just 2 levels later, at 13th level, the Studious spell increases to 4th level spells as a 4th level spell slot, and Fly is added to the list. So again, Water Breathing, now if you cast it as a 4th level spell, now Water Breathing is going to last for 24 hours, which is kind of interesting. And also to help with your spell casting, the Magus has focus spells too, and these are called conflux spells for the Magus. The Magus gets these automatically at 1st level. They start out with 1 focus point to cast the conflux spell, and they get that spell back in between combats when they use 10 minutes of both studying their spell book and a physical regimen. I don't know if that works 5 minutes of each or how that works, but whatever. I love focus spells in 2nd edition because you can and should use them in every combat. You don't feel bad about using a spell or wasting a spell slot because you can get it right back. It's awesome. And now again, kind of like the studious spells, these conflux spells, they aren't going to be big damage dealing spells. The big damage dealing spells you're going to have, they're going to be your high level spell slots, those 4 spell slots. The conflux spells, they're neat though. They're interesting spells that allow the Magus to do some interesting things besides damage enemies, which is great. Now, which conflux spells you get, that kind of depends on your hybrid study and what feats you take. So we're going to take a closer look at that in part 2 of this when we look at hybrid studies. We'll take a real in-depth look at all the different conflux spells because they're really cool spells. You're going to like them. And the last observation on the Magus does not get legendary in anything. They're just like the alchemist in this. So finally, the alchemist isn't alone there. The legendary in they're not legendary in perception, not legendary in armor class, not legendary in saving throw. The Magus just gets to master will save at level 9, and that's pretty early on. That's nice. Then master in simple and martial and unarmed weapon attacks at level 13. That's awesome, like we said. They're master in fortitude saves at level 15 when they get Juggernaut, which is awesome. And they're master at medium armor mastery at level 17. A little high to get that, but that's fine. They're master in quite a few things, but not legendary in anything except for skills. So there you go. That's kind of neat. And that is it. I've been your host, Crunch McDabbles. This has been the Crunch McDabbles Show. Survive Galarian with the Masterclass, the Magus.